Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. So, with this unexpectedly longer spring break than we were anticipating, with the cancellation of the Kazakhstan Grand Prix, we decided to do a bit of a different podcast this week. Obviously, we can't do a race review. We really don't want to preview, the Dutch Grand Prix just yet, because it's a little far out and no one knows what happens during that time frame. Before we do start recording this podcast, though, I do want to take a moment to wish podcast favourite Dennis Onchu a very speedy recovery, because he does seem to have had a training accident that has resulted in him hurting his hand. We are going to be mentioning him later in the podcast, no doubt, because right now we are going to be doing our Moto3 and Moto2 mid-year review, because it's almost the middle of the year, and this season, I suppose, Moto3 has played out pretty much exactly as I expected it to. Moto2, on the other hand, not at all. So we're going to start with Moto3 and start with checking in where we are in the championship.
The top five in Moto3 are probably a bit spread out for what we'd expect, but in fifth position is David Munoz on 60 points. He's got Ivan Ortola up ahead of him on 80 points. In third is Kelly's favourite, Colin Vaya, who's on 95 points. Danny Holgado second on 106 points. And as we'd all be aware of by now, David Alonso is already sort of running away with the championship on 143 points. Between the top five, there's an 83-point gap, which, seeing as we're only sort of 7-8 races in, is quite extensive, but got to give credit to David Alonso with how consistent he's been at the front. Apart from the crash in Jerez, he's I think been first, second, third in pretty much every race. So it does look like it's his to lose at this stage in the season.
And even with that crash in Jerez, he still finished in P7. I did look the stats up just prior to this, and he has won 5 out of the 7 races so far, which, like you say, it's his championship to lose this year now. One thing I suppose to note in regard to that is that this is going to be testing my memory, but Danny Holgado did, I'm not going to say botch it, but he did manage to lose the championship last year when he was 80 points clear. And we still have, I want to say 13 races to go, but honestly, I've sort of lost track with the cancellation and things like that. So there is still plenty of potential for things to get different. One of the good battles that we could still see, however, is the battle for second between Vaya and Holgado, because at this stage, I think it could go either way. One thing I did ask Poz to do before we recorded this, and I've done it as well, is jot down 3 winners and 3 losers. So this is based on the fact that we obviously need to look at what we thought this season was going to play out like and what it actually has. So I will start with a winner from Moto3, and to absolutely no one's surprise, it's going to be David Alonso. He did come into this season as the favourite, with, I believe, all of the MotoGP riders, with the exception of Pedro Acosta, predicting him for the win. And that's only because Pedro Acosta simply put a KTM, Red Bull KTM rider as his prediction. So he's definitely the big winner here because he has come out on top of the expectations. We knew he was going to be good, but I think, yeah, he's better than even we expected at the start of the season.
Yeah, surprising to absolutely no one. My first thought for this was also David Alonso. He's looked so much better than pretty much the whole rest of the field. I think he's topped something like 18 or 19 of the last 20 odd sessions. He's just looked so quick this year, setting lap records in first practice on Friday at pretty much every track so far this year. He's just it's hard to bet against him to keep this up and win the title.
And not just that, he set those lap records on old tyres, which brings me to my first loser of Moto3, which is actually Pirelli tyres. I might be being a bit harsh here, but I'm finding this season's Moto3 racing a lot less spectacular than last season's, and I do think some of that is down to the new tyres. Admittedly, it's the opposite in Moto2, which is quite interesting. I thought they've brought a lot to that racing, but just for Moto3, it's just, yeah, I've got them down as a loser.
I do feel like it's sort of been that way in Moto3 the last few years, though. It's sort of felt like the top five sort of riders are just so far ahead of everyone and break away early on. But I do think with the bikes being quicker as well, with combination of tires and just straight development, the racing has been a bit less sort of close and exciting this year. But I still think it's been pretty good. Moving on to my first loser, this I'll just preface this saying this isn't saying he's sort of underperforming and not been up to standard, but I've gone with Jose Antonio Rueda. Just sort of a combination of little errors he's made himself personally, but also a few injuries here and there, mainly the appendicitis sort of issue that he had that made him sit out of 2 or 3 races. I did have him as one of the title contenders this year, and just have a look. He's down in 8th at the minute, but he's been good in qualifying in the races that he has taken part of. I'm not sure if he's actually qualified off the front row in the races he's done this year. So there's still potential there, but I do think he's a bit too far back to have any real impact on the titles this year.
Considering he has been out for so many races, the fact he's still in 8th position is pretty darn impressive, if you ask me. The person I've put next as my winner is the person 2 places behind him in the standings, and that is Jacob Rulstone. Now, he's a rookie and he has performed really strongly. He is currently leading the Rookie of the Year. Sure, it's just by 1 point, but I think that's still really impressive. The fact he's always up there, he's always seemingly battling for the top 10. I just think it's a really strong showing considering it's his first year, and definitely excited to see what else he can do, really.
I also had Jacob Ralston as one of my winners, but I am sort of going to branch off and include 2 other rookies on it, being Angel Piqueras and Joel Esteban. Just because I've only just remembered that Angel Piqueras has scored a podium this year in Circuit of the Americas, and he's also on sort of the inferior machine on the Honda, which hasn't really changed that much from last year. So it's nice to see a good close rookie battle, and it's nice to see the rookies doing well.
While Ralston is both of our winners, I have his teammate Danny Holgado down as a loser. The expectation I had for him to be fighting more with Alonso, I think that's just been like quite a big disappointment to me because he was so strong last year, and having, I suppose, the contrasting fortunes of no expectation on Ralston and him doing so well to lots of expectation on Holgado. And while he is still doing sensationally, he did finish P14 at the race just been. So, yeah, that's part of why I've got him down as one of my losers.
For one of my losers, I've actually gone for a different rider on one of the KTM's. I've gone with Husqvarna's Tatsuki Suzuki. A couple years ago, Suzuki was showing a lot of promise that he could be a pretty good rider, progress through the ranks, maybe make it to MotoGP this one year, but it just hasn't really materialized. He's been about for 7 or 8 years, and he's never really been able to string a title charge together, and he's getting really close to the maximum Moto2 age. I think he's 26 this year, so he's not got long left in the class to show that he has the sort of potential, and he hasn't shown that he really deserves to move up to Moto2 just yet. And his teammate Colin Vai is proving that he's with a good team on a good bike. So hopefully he can start performing sooner rather than later.
It's funny you should mention Colin Via because he is actually my third winner for Moto3. The guy is like ridiculously quick, and if I'm honest, I had him nowhere in my predictions at the start of the season, much to what I'm sure is Kelly's horror. But he's just been so strong. It does feel like he's found something, and yeah, that's definitely why he's on my winners list.
Yeah, he's been really good, especially with the height that he has, with David Alonso being obviously tiny and Daniel Gardo being sort of average. Colin Vai is right up there. It's probably it's probably a Dutch thing, but yeah, he's really tall, and I can see him in Moto2 next year just on that alone. But as my last winner, I've put just KTM in general. With the development being unfrozen for this year, they've made a lot of like visible changes to their bike. Just from memory, one of the things that I've noticed that I think is really cool is they've changed how the bikes are started up in general to use sort of a more MotoGP type thing in the side of the bike. Only reason I'm thinking of this is because Colin Via stalled his bike coming out of pit lane, I think it was last race, and they got it started up really quickly because of it. And if they used the old starter, I don't think he would have gotten out of pit lane before it closed. But again, KTM just they look like the best bikes. They are pretty much the best bikes in Moto 3 and have been for a number of years.
Which does bring me on to my biggest loser this year. While it's not Honda specifically, it is MLAV Racing because they are absolutely nowhere this year. We have seen, I guess, flashes of Scott Ogden doing something, but I mean, he only ever seems to turn up in free practice and then he's nowhere. And Josh Watley is having a horrendous season, and I expected a lot more from them, and yeah, overall quite disappointed with MLEV Racing and, to be fair, Honda as a whole.
My final loser for Moto 3 was Honda. It, obviously, they have the sort of excuse that, as a just manufacturer in general, they're focusing more on getting the MotoGP bike up to standard. But the problem that that's having is they are sort of neglecting their teams in practically every other class. They haven't been performing in superbikes either. Haven't been doing anything really notable in Moto 3. But I'm pretty sure they were saying at the start of the year they'll get some updates further into the year as they sort of hopefully figure out what's going on with the GP bike, getting it to a stage where it can actually fight for decent points, not just finishing low in the points because everyone else is crashing out. But they have some talented riders coming up through, and yeah, be nice to see them sort of backfighting KTM in Moto 3.
How savage is that? Your short pause after Fight for. I was like, I really want to be able to say fight for podiums, but it's just fight for points at this stage, which is just, I think, yeah, it totally sums up your point of where Honda is at the moment. So, our Moto 2 winners and losers are probably going to be quite similar, I imagine. But before we jump into those, the top five in the standings, it's closer than Moto 3, but it's not, you know, super, super close. In P3, we have Manu Gonzalez, and he's on 66 points. P4, we have Alonso Lopez on 79 points. P3, we have Ayagura on 99 points. And in P2, we have Joe Robots, who is the first of them on triple digits with 115 points. And in P1, we have Sergio Garcia, who is on 122 points. Sergio Garcia and MT Helmets MSI are actually my first winner because they have been sensational so far. We've seen them pick up a couple of 1-2 positions, and they've done this when they're swapped chassis manufacturers. I didn't really expect them to be anywhere. I really didn't see them coming, and they're P1 and P3 in the standings at the moment. So they're definitely my biggest winner.
Yeah, I've gone very similar again. My first winners are actually Sergio Garcia and Joe Roberts. I've sort of put them together just because they're both in the title fight. We both sort of didn't expect either of them, to be fighting at the start of the year. It is nice to see Garcia, especially on the Boscoscuro, which hasn't really been a bike that's been able to fight with the Calixes in the last few years. Now it looks like the Calixes are the ones chasing Boscoscuro, and the top Calix at the moment is Joe Roberts. So it's nice to see sort of a fight between more than just the Calixes in Moto 2 this year.
My first loser is someone who is riding a Calyx, and it is Tony Arbolino because I had him down as a preseason favourite, and he has just not gelled at all with those Pirelli tyres. And I'm actually quite worried that he's just going to completely disappear. I obviously hope I'm wrong, but I definitely think that he needs to find something and find it soon because he's all the way down in P13 in the standings. He's definitely not in the championship fight this year. And given he finished second last year, he's definitely, yeah, he's definitely my biggest loser so far this season.
Yeah, I also had Tony Arbolino as one of my losers. It just doesn't seem like he's really gelled with the new Pirelli tyres. Obviously, he was sort of nowhere from second half of the season onwards last year, but it just hasn't seemed like he's managed to pick himself back up from that and start riding quickly again. Though I feel like it does sort of seem like he's been improving in the last few races, but everyone's been improving the last few races. I've just noticed a lot of sort of riders further down, and I'll touch back on this for my next winner. But it does seem like more and more people are improving, and Arbolino just hasn't been improving to the level we'd expect him to.
And it's the Pirelli tyres who are my next big winner in this section. They were my loser in Moto3, but Pirellis have really shaken up Moto2, especially in guitar, where absolutely nothing was as we expected it to be. They've sort of, at least I think they have helped us have a bit of a championship this year because it sort of reset all the manufacturers and the riders, gave them a more even playing field to come in with. And so, yeah, that's why they're my biggest winner. Well, not biggest winner. That would be Empty Helmets MSI. But yeah, they're definitely up there in my winners category.
Yeah, my next winner is probably the manufacturer that benefited from the tire change the most. I have Boscoscuro, just as a whole. They've been probably the best bike and the bike that you'd want to be on if you wanted to fight for the title this year. Obviously, Empty Helmets MSI, Ogura, and Garcia are doing really well. Alonso Lopez and Aldeguer, not so much, but they've still been sort of in and around the top 5, top 6. And obviously, for the first time in, I think, 12 years in Le Mans, we saw a podium without a Calex on it. So I think it is really good to see another manufacturer up there doing well, and because they don't have that many bikes, it's not like Calex where they could easily be pretty much the whole points in some races. So yeah, I honestly would like to see a Boscoscuro win the title this year just for a bit of change.
And to put some context into that 12-year statistic, the last time there was a non-Calyx on the podium in Moto2, Marc Marquez was standing on that podium. So that sort of just shows how long ago it was, and they're definitely a huge winner. But one rider in particular that you mentioned being on the Boscoscuro was Fermin Aldeguer, and he's down as definitely one of my losers, if not my biggest loser so far. And this absolutely breaks my heart to say because I'm a member of his fan club. I'm a huge Fermin Aldeguer fan. But I just want to look at his year so far, and I am going to blame some of this on Kelly because she's putting the Kelly curse on Fermin. I'm sure of it because the time she predicts him to win, he doesn't, and when she doesn't, he does. So Qatar, we can definitely put down to the tyres. In Portugal, he jumped the start and ended up in P4, which is pretty impressive still after a double long lap penalty. Kota, he podiumed with a P3. Spain, he won his home race, so that's always quite wholesome. Then France, P7. Catalunya and Italy crashed out of both of them. Considering the form we saw at the end of last year, it's just I expected so much more from Furman. So that's why he's down as my loser, even though he's P6 in the championship.
Yeah, I also have Fermin Aldeguer as one of my losers, just to be unoriginal. It's just the same sort of thing. He hasn't found really a level of consistency. Some races he looks like he could win easily, but he's being held back by some of his mistakes. Other races he just doesn't look like he's competitive whatsoever. Whereas the likes of Sergio Garcia, Ayagura, they're, apart from Agura's qualifying, generally pretty consistently up there. So, yeah, if Aldeguer doesn't find that level of consistency soon, I honestly don't think he will be fighting for the title come the end of the year.
I know you mentioned this rider earlier as one of your winners, but my final winner is a rider that is definitely going to be fighting for the title if he keeps his form up, and it's Joe Roberts. He has turned up at the exact moment he needs to. So, with the arrival of Trackhouse in MotoGP, there's a very clear path for him. And even though he's turned down that Aprilia ride before, he's not going to turn it down this time, not when they're just signed Jorge Martin. So he's definitely my big winner because I didn't expect it from him. I don't know what's gotten into him and how he's pulled this form off, but he's definitely showing up this year.
As my final winner, again, I've picked sort of a couple of riders. Just to throw a few names out there, it's some of the rookies that are just started sort of starting to figure out how to ride the Moto2 bikes. In particular, Senna Agius put up his best result of his career so far in Catalunya and is currently leading the Rookie of the Year chase. Diogo Moreira was, I think, P11 in Mugello, and he's looked competitive sort of throughout the year, but he's just sort of thrown it away whenever he's up there. But he's strung a good result together now and will probably continue to build on it. And last but not least, I've gone with Dennis Onju, obviously. Again, put up his best result in Mugello, qualified automatically to Q2, and just sort of recently it has looked like he's been starting to figure out more how to ride that bike, and because KTM Io and Husqvarna, which is Dennis Onju and Senna Agius, are both on WP suspension for this year, they were sort of struggling at the start of the year with a lack of data, but it has sort of looked like they've figured out a general base setting, and yeah, hope the rookie battle sort of keeps going on to the end of the year, and the rookies keep doing good.
My final loser actually has a rookie for a teammate. His rookie teammate is Jaume Masia, and I expected more from Masia, but he's definitely not on my losers list. But his teammate Boben Snyder is. because while he is injured, he's only got 2 points, so he has been outscored by Macias so far. But the reason he's on my loser list is because Danny Munoz came in to replace him, and while he hasn't scored any points for various reasons while replacing him, he's been topping sessions and right up there. And considering he, he hasn't raced in Moto2 before, whereas Bowman Snyder you'd expect to be turning up a bit more, I just, yeah, I do feel like he's going to be replaced at the end of the season unless he really comes back from this injury absolutely, you know, really strongly in top 10 straight away, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, he's been in Moto2 long enough that he sort of should be performing more consistently now. But moving on to my final loser, I feel like this was kind of easy to pick. I've picked forward with Boscoscuro and Calix, or obviously being the two fighting for the title. It seems pretty much every weekend you just have the two forward boys of Alex Escreech and Xavi Artigas right at the back of the field. And when you consider that Jorge Navarro jumped on that bike for Catalunya and scored a decent number of points, which could be the only points forward see all year, it just sort of shows that they need to start sort of improving the bike. Obviously, they wouldn't want to be at the back of the field every weekend, but they have been for a number of years. So it would be good to see if they can sort of jump up the field a bit more, but I just don't see it happening because it hasn't happened since they started making their own chassis to race.
I would absolutely love to see them up there because the more the merrier. I love all the aspects of this competition, and it does. I don't know if it tells a story that Navarro came in and did score points, or if, it's a combination of the riders. But yeah, only time will tell, but hopefully they make some steps forward. So those are our big winners and our big losers so far in Moto2 and Moto3. Please tell us if you agree with us or completely disagree with us, because we have seen so much unexpected and so much expected racing this season. I just want to say thank you again for everyone that tunes in and listens. We really appreciate you all, and we will be here again next week. What we'll be talking about? Probably more silly season news, if Enea Bastianini has signed, if anyone else has signed, and we look forward to seeing you.